Radio Cairo, FM 95.4. The Voice of Egypt.
From Radio Cairo, and it's 4 o'clock. Today is going to be a program in the hot weather of Cairo, talking about some summer readings as usual. And today we're going to open the world of books and to try to give our listeners an idea about 3 of the new books that are in the market nowadays. And you know the rules of the game. The rules of the game are read it, skim it, or toss it. So 3 books, I believe. Definitely they are interesting. I'm not agreeing with all of what is written in them, but definitely it's nice to talk about these books, read them, and not even skim them. So after the break, more about the world of books. This is the World of Info. We're coming live from Studio 3. Our telephone number is 2578-9407. My name is Dr Amr Mabrouk. Muhammad is on the controls. And we're here till 5 p.m. with the world of books. 3 books that we are going to present today are definitely books of interest. Some of them are, one of them is definitely the interest comes not only from the title of the book, but from the writer. And the writer is Mr. Salah Muntasir, who has written a book, My Witness, My Testimony on the era of Gamal Abdel Nasser, the years of victory and defeat. Well, this is an interesting book. It's yet a small, short book, and Mr. Salah Muntasir is definitely a man who has a daily column in the Al-Ahram newspaper, and you can always find it very nice to read whatever he is writing, because he has a very beautiful prose. And so when he's writing a book, definitely it will be a book of interest. And it's a small, short book. It's only about 142 pages, and definitely it's a book that has to be read. There is no need to skim it because it's already a short book, and there is no need to toss it because the topic is important and the writer is important. The topic is Gamal Abdel Nasser. Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was the president of Egypt from 1956 until 1970, and he was the leader of the Free Liberal Officers who have made the revolution. In the beginning it was a sort of an army, simple army mutiny, but it's definitely a revolution, because the definition of revolution is a movement that changes the political system. And there was a political system in Egypt prior to the 23rd of July, and there was a king who ruled Egypt, who was the grandchild of Muhammad Ali, the founder of modern Egypt. And he was practically the last ruler of Egypt, and theoretically he was the one before the last, because the last king was the young, or the child king, the son of Farouk, King Ahmed Fuad. So when we talk about the days and the times of Gamal Abdel Nasser, they have definitely seen days of victory and days of defeat. And with the days of victory is, first of all, his personal victory. He himself was the original leader and the founder of the liberal forces, or liberal officers, or the free officers movement, and definitely it is the movement that was able to topple the regime. And Abdel Nasser was the one who moved everything, and he had all the strings and the threads of the situation in his hand. He has put Muhammad Naguib, who was a major general in the army, very well known for being a very clean slate officer, a man who was never corrupted, and a man who had a lot of popularity among the young officers, a man who was a decorated war hero, who was injured twice in the war of 1948. So definitely a man with this caliber would be always considered to be a good facade for the revolution. However, Muhammad Naguib was a temporary leader. By the end of 1953, it was very clear that Nasser was the one who was controlling the situation. So the first victory, or the personal victory of Gamal Abdel Nasser, was to omit Muhammad Naguib, and of course before that to declare the end of the reign of Muhammad Ali's dynasty, and Egypt has become a republic. So in 1956, the second thing was that Nasser became the president of Egypt. Nasser was definitely a very popular leader. He had a great charisma, and he had the power to mobilize the people and to follow him. In the beginning, Nasser was having political aims of improvement of the economic condition of Egypt, and at the same time improving the status of Egypt and the Egyptians. And he was coming from a lower middle class family. He understood quite well how the Egyptians were faring, and he became always attached to the lower economic class of the population. He thought that the farmers and the workers of Egypt, the people who are poor, are the ones who are suffering, and therefore all his life he has never betrayed this class of people, of Egyptians, that formed the majority of Egyptians, maybe 90% at the time of the start of his reign. The people who really were supported by Nasser, who always lived their life, and he had always lived a very modest life all through his life. The second important point about Nasser is that he always maintained chastity in his life and purity of his life and family during his lifetime. And of course, in the beginning, he was not very much into the fight with Israel, or trying not to solve the problem of the Middle East. But he was faced with a lot of problems at that time politically, with a lot of readings of what happened at that period of time. We can always summarize what happened into one step at a time. Israel, Ben Gurion, Israel, who was in control of the situation and the founder of Israel, State of Israel, said and had always the vision that Israel, at the borders or the territories that Israel was occupying by the end of 1948 war, the war that they call it the Independence War, their Independence War, and we call it in the Arab world in Nakba, or the disaster. He thinks, and he thought rightfully, that rightfully on their part, of course, that this state with these borders cannot live a decent life and cannot live or maintain such secure borders. And he always had the feeling that the Jerusalem Latin Kingdom was a victim of geography. It has been suffocated by the big amount of Arabs that were living and intermingling and cutting the lines of connection between the different principalities of Jerusalem Latin Kingdom. So he thought that by the end of 1949, Israel has to swallow more land, has to get more land, has to get more control of the land. So the war of 1956 was inevitable. Ben Gurion was trying to get a chance, and therefore he was not convinced with all the messages that were sent behind the lines between Nasser and anyone who approached him about how should things go on, because Nasser said, I can accept the truth of and the rules and the statement of 1947, which has mentioned the division of Palestine between Arab and Israeli state. And of course, by the end of 1948 war, Israel has occupied more territory than the one that was allocated to it in the 1947 statement. And therefore, if Israel ever accepts the 1947 resolution, this would mean that Israel will have to leave land that is already occupied, including, of course, Eilat, that is the port, the strategic port on the Red Sea, or in Aqaba, on the Aqaba Gulf, and therefore it could have been very, very difficult for Israel to do that. And therefore, Ben Gurion felt that he is obliged to try to irritate Nasser as much as possible, to make the raid of Gaza, and with the loss of a lot of Egyptian soldiers that reached 22, of a small group of Egyptian soldiers who were guarding a post, and of course it ended with 59 soldiers and officers. 22 of them lost their lives in this not meaningful attack. And of course this pushed Nasser, who was having no resources to get any weapons for his army from the west, and had to buy arms from the east. And of course at the same time the great slap on the back, of course, by the American administration when they refused to support refused even to the International Bank would support the imagination of Nasser and the great plan of Nasser to build the high dam. So all this put Nasser into the direction of nationalization of the Suez Canal. So Nasser could have been a victim of all these decisions and being trapped in all these directions. The unprecedented victory that followed with the tripartite attack in Egypt by the British, the French, and the Israelis in 1956 ended with the withdrawal of both of the three armies from the Egyptian territory, and therefore creating the great myth of Gamal Abdel Nasser, the man who was able to defeat three powers which were overnumbering him and overpowering him. And of course this added a lot to his popularity and added of course a lot to his enemies. So when Salah Muntasir has written this book, he has given us a great example about how a man in process of leading a country that is Egypt, that is in the middle of the world or the Middle East. And of course the fact that the important position of Egypt, the important place that Egypt is occupying on the map, its control of the Suez Canal and its control as the border between the East and the West, all this have pushed Egypt to become one of the most important countries strategically, geographically, and therefore always the site of ambitions of control of this country and of this region. So Egypt unfortunately was not like Finland, for example, or not like a northern country that geography has been kind to, making it not that important target for enemies from all over the world. It is in the middle of the world. And therefore anyone who's ruling Egypt has always to face the dilemma and has to be the victim of geography and has to be the victim of history. So Nasser was a great popular leader, and he has done great favors to Egypt, and of course great mistakes that happened. Whether these mistakes were done by him or he was forced to do, this remains to be under the control of historians and under control of theoretical theories and discussions that could be endlessly. People who are putting Nasser into to be like, for example, like prophets or saints, and people who are demonizing him and consider him to be a demon. All these can put us into one conclusion. Gamal Abdel Nasser was a human being. Gamal Abdel Nasser tried hard to save his country. He was a nationalist. He was a popular leader. He was definitely on the side of the poor people. He had his mistakes. His involvement in Yemen war has led to bleeding of a lot of economy and young people who lost their lives over there. He was pushed and pulled to the trap of 1967 war, and the gloomy outcome of this war, with loss of Sinai and of course the inevitable loss that happened of the Western Bank and the Golan Heights in this war, and Jerusalem. Of course, we cannot consider Nasser to be 100% responsible for it, but definitely he was pushed into this ambush and pushed into this trap. He tried hard in the last 3 years of his life to build the army and to regain the territories and the land, the Egyptian land that was taken out of him. But unfortunately he died very young at the age of 52, a victim of uncontrolled diabetes and a severe heart attack. that can really happen in people who are that young, simply because they have faced a lot of stresses. So Nasser, whether he is a prophet or a saint or a demon, remains to be at what point are you standing from Nasser. And from my point of view, Nasser was a leader of Egypt who has tried hard, who has given a lot of accomplishments, and like great people usually, they have great victories and great failures. So the book of Salah Muntasir, which is a short book about Gamal Abdel Nasser, and it's the testimony on the Abdel Nasser era, can really be a good helper for our young listeners to read and to pass through the lines of Salah Muntasir, who has this excellent way of expressing himself in such a very small number of lines and papers, so that you can finish this book of 115 pages if you are an avid reader in 1 hour or 2 hours, and you will have an idea of Nasser's life and Nasser period, the great victories and the great defeat. A book by Salah Muntasir that deserves to be read, and we have shown that from in the world of books from World of Info. So we're still coming live. This is World of Info from Studio 3. Our telephone number is 257-89407. My name is Amr Mabrouk, and Dr Muhammad is still at the controls. And we're here till 5 p.m. and we're talking about books. The second book is about President Sadat. We cannot discuss a book about Gamal Abdel Nasser without discussing a book about Anwar Sadat, of course, because both of them were very good friends. Anwar Sadat, always through the life of Nasser, has been one of the greatest supporters of Gamal Abdel Nasser. He has been always part of he of course he owes Nasser a lot by admitting him to the Free Officers group in the very last days of before the revolution. And the second most important thing is that Sadat has been always giving his vote to any decision that Nasser would discuss with the Free Officers. He always knew for sure that Sadat would always support him. Sadat has written a book named This is Your Uncle Gamal, My Son, and he has dedicated this book to his son, and by chance his name is Gamal, to Gamal Abdel Nasser. About that, he has written a book about Nasser and dedicated the book to his son, and whose name Gamal also, and to Nasser. And of course he has been always showing the support to Nasser all the years of Nasser's presidency, and he was the Speaker of the Parliament, the President of the Parliament during Nasser's days, and then he became the Vice President, the Senior Vice President of Nasser, and therefore it was accepted and expected that he is going to get on the helm of power. And when he reached the helm of power, the supporters or the men of Nasser saw that he is the weakest link, and that they can easily control him, manipulate him, and force him to do whatever they want to do. They were like a small cartel. They were very good friends. They have a lot of connections between them. They are related to each other. They had some of them had a intermarital relation between their sons and their daughters. So they were like a strong family friend bonds. And Nasser and Sadat was just in the middle of nowhere in comparison to them. And yet Sadat was able to change them with a pure Machiavellian style. When we read the book of Machiavelli, by the way, which is called The Prince, you can really understand what Nasser did after the revolution, of how he was able to change the political system. And Sadat has also applied the rules of Machiavelli in changing the political system, because it's written in the rules of power. If you want to change the rules and you have become the prince of a certain principality, and you found the people who were supporting the prince, who are definitely bureaucratic employees in this principality. If you want to keep them, they will be very honest and very loyal to you. If you want to remove them, they are very easily removed. because they don't have any protection. They are not major landowners. They are not major business owners. So it's very easy to dislodge them from their position, and they will not have any loyal supporters who are going to support them if they leave. So Anwar Sadat, after 1971 May, he made his revolution. He called it the revolution, and simply he decided that he will get rid of them and put them into jail with simple accusation of that they were acting against the state. And of course, this is the legitimacy of the president and the presidency, of course, at that time. So when we are considering Nasser or Sadat in controlling of the situation, Sadat was able to control the situation and put all the strings and the threads of the game in his own hands. Anwar Sadat had an important nationalist movement aim in his mind, and this was simply to try to regain the land that was occupied by Israel. He was trying always to get back the army and stand on its feet again. Nasser has done a great effort in the last 3 years of his life to build this Egyptian army and to maintain a decent supply of equipment and training to the Egyptian army. He couldn't have any supplier but the Soviet Union at that time. Sadat knew that the only supplier is Soviet Union, and he tried as much as possible to get from them any possible equipment for offensive movements, and unfortunately they supplied him with minimal offensive weapons and moderate defensive weapons, and always he was on the weaker side. The Egyptian army was always on the weaker side technologically and equipment wise in comparison to the Israeli defense forces. So the only thing that proved effective at that time was the spirit of the Egyptian soldier. The Egyptian soldiers and officers in 1973 war have proved that it is the power of the soul, the power of the spirit, that can really overcome the power of the high-tech equipment and the high-tech arms. He knew quite well, Sadat, that he will not be able to reach the international borders. He lacks the air defense, that is mobile air defense, that will make him able to increase the amount of distance of land that he will occupy in Sinai or try to liberate from the Israeli forces. He knew he has a limited capacity, but yet he had the power and the decision making to attack and to regain the Egyptian dignity in this war. Sadat didn't have only the problem of the war, but he had the problem of the political arena, where there were a lot of leftist movement and of course a lot of rightist movement. And by the rightist movements we are talking about the religious movements of the politically religious. They like to call themselves religious, but simply these are political factions, whether they are what they call themselves the Muslim Brothers or Jama'ah al-Islamiyah, in comparison to the leftist movement. Sadat was not very fond of them, simply because they made a lot of demonstrations in his early 2 years where they attacked him personally and attacked his wife and family. So Sadat decided to combat these movements with the political Muslim groups, especially the Muslim Brothers, who started a sort of attack of the leftists. But what he didn't calculate was how these people would fare against him, how their main target was to reach the power and to try to get rid of Sadat himself. So Anwar Sadat, in his 11 years of reign, definitely has seen a lot. We can see him suffering, fighting, and acting politically like a trapeze player, a man who's walking on rope and simply trying to control the situation. He was a great politician. He believed in his capabilities and his own personal capabilities. Maybe he didn't confide much into his consultants, and maybe if he has taken the opinion of some of these consultants who at that time were really of great value, politicians and diplomats and military men who were of great status and very high education. Sadat, unfortunately, was not following them on the same wavelengths. He always knew he would take their opinion, but he will not. He will make his own mind, and his decision making is made only by himself. So, a super intelligent man alone in the political arena needs always to have good advice from the people surrounding him. And definitely, he not always was taking this advice. However, Sadat had the intelligence to try to break the status quo of war between Egypt and Israel. He wanted to regain the land, and he knew that arm-wise or war-wise, he is not able 100% to get back the land, because of the fact that nobody will allow him to have a strong army, because still again Egypt is the victim of geography. If Egypt has a strong army that can become a powerful army that can overpower Israel, Egypt will become the founder of an empire. And they don't, the political factions and the powers, the superpowers at that time, doesn't want to have a strong power in the southern part of the Mediterranean. A place like Egypt, if you have, can easily form a strong empire. This happened during the Mamluks' time. This happened during the Pharaoh's time. Thutmose III it was very easy to, if he has a strong army, was able to found an empire. And as we go, Alexander the Great decided to make the base of the empire Egypt. And if we follow later on after the Islam, we can find that Egypt has changed from part of the Islamic state to an Islamic empire. This is the Mamluk Empire, the Ayyubid Empire before them, the Fatimid before the Ayyubids. All this can be a strong base for an empire, can always make Egypt very easily in control of a situation. So always has been a suggestion not to give pure power. The last empire, or the last trial of building an empire of Egypt, happened during Muhammad Ali time, and when he reached the borders of Istanbul, definitely he was forced by the European forces and by the Treaty of London 1839-1840, and after reaching the borders of Istanbul 1839, he was forced to set back his army, pull back his forces to Egypt, and give away his territories in Syria. So Sadat knew geography, knew political science, and knew history, and knew that he will never be allowed to get out of the borders of Egypt. He will not be allowed to build an empire. People will never support him to build a strong army. That's why he believed in taking bits and pieces, and believed in the political statement that what we don't take all, we win all we have to win any situation. Bits and pieces can build a sort of a resolution. So the politics of the art of what is possible, this was the motto of President Sadat. He could have reached better deals if he had more confided in his consultants, but definitely he was able to get the land back. His biggest mistake was allowing the political Islamic movements to make his fight with the leftist groups, and therefore these people considered themselves in a higher situation, having more stakes to play with, were able to control the political under arena for a certain period of time, try to force their way, try to force the young students to get into the groups, and the people who are not allowed, who are not becoming members of their groups, are being terrorized. So his mistake was getting these people again from the underground, giving this the legitimacy to themselves, and then trying Sadat to tame them. He found himself as a victim of them, unfortunately, in 1981, when he was assassinated in a very bad, dirty crime, when a young officer and young people have decided to betray their president and their supreme commander and kill him in the middle of the army in a parade. So Sadat, as a victim of this political terrorist group, definitely stands as an example of a Greek tragedy, if we use the expression. So 11 years of rule of Sadat cannot be summarized in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. But the book of Hamdi Batran, Sadat 81, deserves to be read as a sort of introduction to this whole period. He has analyzed and collected a lot of resources and sources from different parts of the newspapers and from the books, and put them through in one big book that you can read, whether you agree with part of his analysis or you just take the part of the picture. You will see the summary of Sadat's reign in 11 years. Always we say Sadat was not a traitor, definitely. Sadat was a president who tried very much to regain the land. He tried very much to improve the conditions of the Egyptians, and he was definitely the sole producer of the great decision of the crossing of the Egyptian forces against all odds the Suez Canal and trying to liberate Sinai from the Israeli forces. So we have a great tribute to Anwar Sadat. We are talking about a president who tried hard, president again who was a human being, who made glorious decisions and made, of course, mistakes, that one of them, he was a victim of them, which is allowing a political terrorist group to come back when they promised him that they are going to do peaceful politics, which of course they didn't a bit to. So talking about Sadat and talking about Gamal Abdel Nasser in this afternoon will bring us in our summer readings after the break to a novel which is having a political background, but a book that deserves to be read. So stay with us, tuned into the world of info, the world of books, from a sunny afternoon in Cairo.
Dance in my car.
So this is World of Info, coming live from Studio 3, and our telephone number is 25789407. And you're still here till 5 p.m. and we're talking about the world of books. And yes, we have given you two books, one book about President Sadat and another book about President Nasser, and the third book is a beautiful novel. Yes, I read a lot about this novel that has been produced into the year 2011. And yet it is, unfortunately, I was not able to get a copy of myself until I found out that Dar al-Shuruk has translated this book. It's originally written in English and it's by Dr. Hisham Matar. And we have to know, first, before we talk about this beautiful novel, we have to talk about the man, Hisham Matar. Hisham Matar is a scholar, a very highly educated gentleman who is living in New York. And he was born in New York to a Libyan family. He has spent his childhood in Tripoli, then in Cairo, and his first novel was In the Country of Men in the year 2006, which was shortlisted in the Booker, and has received a lot of credit. And he works as an associate professor in Barnard College in Columbia University. So a very prestigious professor has written another book, and the book is Ikhtifa, or The Disappearance, by Hisham Matar. Wow, Anatomy of Disappearance, 2011, and it is translated into Arabic in 2012, which is, unfortunately, was not very popular edition that disappeared, and I was not able to get my own copy until it was republished in 2018. And it is beautifully translated by Muhammad Abdel Nabi. So, The Anatomy of Disappearance. So what is this book about? This book is about a young child of a political asylum seeker, a man who belonged to a regime that was toppled. It's no mention about Libya or something like that, but we can really and clearly understand that the father of the narrator of the book was a politician. He was coming from a very well-off family, so there is no problem with the money. And he was the aide of the king, who was toppled and removed. There is no mention about the country, but there is a mention about where he was deposed to. He was living in Cairo, in Zamalek, in a beautiful apartment that is overlooking the Nile. And his son, well, his son, that's the narrator. Or simply, it's a matching story with the life and the times of Hisham Matar himself. Hisham Matar has suffered the same suffering. His father was a politician that was against the regime of Muammar Gaddafi, and he was kidnapped and disappeared. And nobody found a trace of him, but rumors have it that he was kidnapped and killed. So the book is not talking about the father per se. It's talking about the feeling of the son. And the son had a mother who was a beautiful lady, coming from a very good family that belonged to the same country like the father. And she was coming from a very well-off family as well. And unfortunately, 2 years before the disappearance of the father, the mother developed cancer and died very rapidly. So, at the age of 14, the son found himself suddenly orphaned, both sides. He was orphaned from his mother's side at the age of 12, and at the age of 14, he lost his father. In the 2 years between 12 and 14, the father and the son met Mona. And Mona was an important character in the story, because she was a beautiful young lady. And in her age, she was just 14 years senior of the young boy, and 14 years less than the 15 years less than the age of the father. They saw her in Al-Hagami, in Alexandria. Her mother is British and her father is Egyptian, and she was beautiful. The son, who was in his early teens, was attracted to her beauty, and he liked her very much. And it seems that the father has the same taste like the son. The father liked the lady, and he was moved more towards her side when he saw his son very attracted to the young lady as well. So he decided to get married to her. So in beautiful prose, Hisham Matar is describing how his emotions and his feelings have changed towards Mona, and how his beautiful feelings that he had towards her, and the admiration, and we cannot call it love, but the real admiration of a young teenager towards Mona, who was extremely beautiful in his own words, has changed gradually from what he called the inevitable hate, because she's going to be his stepmother. So wow, how can a person describe the emotions of a young teenager like Hisham Matar has done? And how the prose goes on analyzing how the man has disappeared mysteriously in Geneva when he was supposed to meet them, and he disappeared. And how simply he knew that his father had a personal barrister or a lawyer in Geneva, and that his father was kidnapped from the apartment of a Swiss lady who turned out to be his friend. How far was this friendship going, and how mysterious this man was in? We always remain with one important point, that his father, because he felt always being terrorized or mesmerized, and that he might, because of his involvement in politics, would always be a target of the new regime of his country, and his life was doomed, he decided to do important decisions. The first decision was his son has to have the best possible education. The second point is his son has to have education away from politics. and his son must not be involved in any political movement so that he doesn't become a target of the new regime. Of course, by then it was an old regime. And so the decision was to send this son to the most expensive private school in the UK, where he is going to meet people of the A+ class. And for example, and very sophisticated families, his roommate in his room was simply a man whose father was a famous conductor of one of the famous prestigious symphony orchestras in Europe, and his mother was an opera singer. So these are the kinds of students who were there. How tough was the education, how harsh the education was very important for him to become a very cultured, educated man. And when it was declared that his father was kidnapped, and most probably by the regime, and most probably he was killed later on, his will was announced. And strange enough, in the will we can find the father hands and the father character controlling the future of the young son. He said that until the age of 18, his stepmother will be the custodian of him. His stepmother will take 300,000 pounds, sterling pounds, on the 10-year basis installments. So every year she will have 30,000 pounds, while the rest of the money will go to the son. Part of it will be given to the son at the age of 18. The whole part will be given to him at the age of 24, only on one condition, that by the age of 24 he will have a PhD, not just a bachelor degree, not just a master's degree, but a PhD. And this PhD has to be not in business and not in political science. Wow, what an education. And what a change in personality that this son has been subjected to. And what difficult times he passed through. And how he tried to convince the lawyer, his barrister, the father's barrister, to meet the Swiss lady, who turned out to be a dear friend of his father and lover, almost like a wife of his. So, the life and the times of this young boy, who changed in 10 years into a decent man with a PhD. And he went back, where? To Cairo, to live in Zamalek. So how was the relation between him and his stepmother? The relation which started with love at first sight and admiration at first sight, into inevitable hating of her, and then another time of fascination with her character and personality, when she was living in the UK with a friend, and he living away. So when she knew that he came back to Cairo, the question for her to him was, shall I pay you a visit now and come back to Cairo? And the answer, after a long pause, sure, if you want to. With a sentence and a meaning, please don't. So, writing the emotions and the lifetimes of this poor son, who had all the means to live a normal life, and yet his mother died from cancer and his father was kidnapped. So, what is the real anatomy of disappearance? A book by Hisham Matar. A book that really can touch your emotions and feelings when he, the writer, describes the emotion of the young boy as he is passing through these turmoil years. How he is living the different lives, and how he was thinking of telling his best friend, the German gentleman, young gentleman, whose father was the famous conductor. Should he tell him that his father was kidnapped and brutally murdered or not? And when he reached the decision that he is going to tell him, his friend just misses the chance because he was watching TV and he didn't want to disturb him. And how his best friend told him everything about his family, but he kept one secret. And in the last day of his friend's in the school, he gave him the secret that his mother, the famous opera singer, had an ailment that made her lose her voice. So, not any person or any family is exempted from tragedy and troubles. And as we go through our lives, where our emotions could be derived from us, and at the same time living day to day, every time and every day our emotions change. What we love could soon hate or simply become indifferent. So as they always say, after 10 years, people you are very much were emotionally involved with him or her, and suddenly you find yourself, you don't care anymore, in a friendship or in a basis of a relation, like the main character of the novel, who simply lost his interest in his stepmother. He doesn't care, should she come or not. But he came back to the roots, to the small apartment in Zamalek, where he lived his early years, the most lovable times of his life, with his family, the mother and the father, who simply disappeared. So anatomy of disappearance is not just by the disappearance of the father, but it's the disappearance of the mother earlier, 2 years earlier, and the disappearance of the stepmother 2 years later, and he living as an isolated island with families and relatives just asking from far away distances and saying, hope you are fine. So the message is clear. Anatomy of Disappearance by Hisham Matar, a book that deserves to be read. I think this is all what we have today from the world of books. We have given you today 3 books of the summer reading, books that can be easily read on the beach or in sunny Cairo afternoon. So the first book was my testimony on the age or the era of Gamal Abdel Nasser, The Years of Victory and Defeat by Salah Muntasir, Sadat 1981 by Hamdi al-Batran, and the last but not least, Hisham Matar, Anatomy of Disappearance, translated beautifully in Arabic by Muhammad Abdel Nabi. Books deserve to be read, and next week, next Thursday, will be their World of Info. We came to you live from Studio 3. My name is Dr Amr Mabrouk. Dua Muhammad was on the controls. See you next time, next Thursday, on the same station, 95.4 from Radio Cairo. Have a beautiful weekend.